Wetpixel Live. My name's Adam Hanlon. I'm the editor of Wetpixel, and we'd like to thank Backscatter for sponsoring this episode. Backscatter do a huge range of underwater imaging gear, cameras, strobes, housings, whatever you need, they've got it. You can find them at backscatter.com, and if you head on over there, they've got a massive range of stuff, obviously in store and online. I'd like to welcome my friend and fellow photographer, Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hey, Adam. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. And I thought we'd jump into a meaty topic today, and I'm going to ask Alex how to choose an underwater strobe.
Well, a favourite topic actually, and I think the first thing I'd say about it is it's a really important area, and I think the average underwater photographer doesn't take it seriously enough. You know, it's very common that you see people coming on the forums who've, put this much effort into choosing their housing, this much effort into choosing their camera, and then they're trying to save some money and just make do with some underwater flash gun, which for me goes against photography. Photography is all about light. If I got a room of photographers together and say, hands up, who thinks light is important for photography? I can guarantee all the hands are going to go up. Yet, the moment that, they're all willing to buy top of the range camera, top of the range housing, and then they'll look to save money on strobes. And that just doesn't make any sense to me as an underwater photographer, because 90% or more of your main subjects for your underwater photos are going to be lit with flash. Yep. And the better that quality of light, the better your images. It's really simple. And that quality comes from choosing the right strobes. Investing in really good gear will really make the difference. So thinking you can get away with a video light, trying to save some money because this one's a couple of $100 less than that one. Think about what you're saying. It's like saying, imagine if you were a landscape photographer, and someone could say to you, for the next 2 years, if you give me an extra couple of $100, you'll always have better light when you go out to shoot landscape photographers. They'd bite your arm off. They'd pay you 10 times over. And we have that option as underwater photographers. So I'm not saying expensive is always better, but it's not an area for me to skimp and save. It's it's an area that totally transforms, potentially your underwater photography. Yep.
I agree, and I think the other point behind, and this is somewhat digressing, but a strobe is for life, or potentially
for
life.
It's a very good point. Yeah.
And whereas in the average strobe's life, you may well change cameras multiple times, or housings and ports, and technology will come and go. Ultimately, the strobe will probably outlast all those things. So you're making quite a long-term decision when you buy a strobe. Whereas typically cameras and housings, they're relatively long-term. I know they're expensive, but often we do change them more regularly. So it's worth investing the time and effort into considering what you want, or what you want to get out of a strobe before you jump into that purchase. Yeah.
So I think the next thing to say is that, different strobes have different strengths and weaknesses, and there cannot be, for me, a perfect underwater strobe, simply because the demands of a strobe, say, for shooting big animals in the blue, is very different from the demands of shooting super macro, when actually you need a very different quality of light potentially, but you certainly need a very different footprint of strobe, because, the amount of light, just as an example. So there is no perfect strobe. And I'm not going to recommend that you go out and buy, 5 different strobes to cover every option. I think what you need to do is you need to think about the types of images you're going to take, and then choose a strobe that is biased in its abilities to that type of picture. And then you've thought about how you're going to manage that strobe in the other types of pictures. If you're a bit like you and I, who do a bit of everything, then we perhaps need more generalist strobes than someone who just specializes in one thing or just specializes in something else. If you're a dedicated macro shooter, then you can make very clear decisions about your strobes that'll make a really big difference, to your picture. So just a little bit, first of all, on perhaps the most important aspect, which is quality of light. Now, different types of underwater pictures require different qualities of light. But certainly if you shoot wide angle pictures in clear blue water, you want strobes that have a nice, wide, even coverage of warm light. And the best way to produce that is a strobe with a large flash tube, usually a large circular flash tube, and a good reflector, and from time to time, a good diffuser. And that combination will work well in that situation, because it will evenly light your scene without bright hot spots and big shadows and that sort of thing. And also those strobes are easier to use because the wider and more even your light, the less sensitive that lighting is to your aiming.
Yep.
If you have light strobes that don't produce such an even wide light, that makes a big difference. Now, the area that always causes loads of confusion when talking about this is people always think that the most important specification when they're looking at strobe is the flash power, and the best
Yep.
measure of that is the guide number.
Yep.
The guide numbers are such a poor guide to how good a strobe is. They should actually be called the no guide at all number, because they are very misleading. And the reason for that is the best light you can have for a wide angle in clear water is a wide, even beam.
Yep.
The wider you spread that beam, the lower, with a given output of energy, the lower the guide number becomes, because the guide number is a measure of a point of exposure in the middle. So if you make
Yep.
a very focused torch with a torch-like beam with a very narrow beam that lights
Yep.
very brightly the middle of the frame, that will produce a really, really high guide number. And
Yep.
that will produce ugly underwater photos. So a
Yep.
guide number can be a very, very misleading guide of a strobe. A slightly more valuable measure of power is the watt seconds or the energy output of the strobe. Again, it's not perfectly correlated, and it's also
Yep.
lied about, as we've discovered in some Wetpixel reviews a little bit. But that's a slightly better measurement. But ultimately, I would recommend talking to photographers about the power of the flash gun. Does this flash gun have the power you need? And if it does, then you're generally fine. Sorry, Adam, you're going to say something.
With big wide angle scenes, so we're talking here about circular flash tubes. We're talking about soft, warm light. The reality is that almost inevitably that's going to involve quite a big, powerful strobe, because any strobe that you run at full power continuously will, well, any strobe you run at full power, the quality of light that it puts out is going to be harsher than it would be if you're running a strobe at half power. So if you put two strobes together and you need the same amount of light by running one at full power, one at half power, the one at half power will always produce a better quality of light. So even though flash power is a bit of a red herring, bear in mind that if you can run a strobe at a lower power and get an equivalent amount of light, that will still give you a better quality of light. So it's not a simple equation of power. It doesn't count. Power does count, but it's not necessarily the most important criteria.
Now, the flip side of this is that if you shoot in lower visibility conditions, you don't want flash guns that spray light everywhere, because they're not just going to light the subject up, they're going to light all the particles in the water. In lower visibility conditions, we're always normally forced to shoot close focus wide angle. And in those situations, you really don't need loads and loads of flash power either. So, think about the types of diving you do. If you're predominantly a macro shooter, wide soft beams are often not the best type of lighting. And what you need is either a flash that produces a more directional beam of light, or an ability to adjust those wide soft beams into producing that. So what I would say for a good all-rounder of a strobe, if you dive in lots of different conditions and do lots of types of underwater photography, is a strobe that gives you the options of modifying its quality of light to suit the conditions that you want. If you know that you specifically shoot always clear water, big wide angle, then it's very clear what route you go. If you always do low visibility, predominantly macro diving, say you're a UK-based diver, then again, you can buy a strobe. It's got quite a narrow beam. That kind of more torchlight beam, that focus beam, can actually be very valuable in those conditions for not creating backscatter. Those strobes tend to be cheaper to buy as well, smaller as well, and those are often more comfortable for shore diving. Better for maneuvering around a macro port for different lighting styles and that sort of thing. So all those factors come in. It's why I said there's no perfect strobe, but not thinking about what type of quality you want, light you want for the type of photography you're doing, and then buying a strobe that matches that. That's a really foolish way to go through it. So it's really important to think it through and buy the right strobe.
Agreed. Yeah. And I think maybe more practically, obviously some of the things you want to consider as well is your triggering mechanism. How are you going to make this strobe actually flash? And increasingly now there's a trend towards fiber optic systems, but you need to make sure that your camera system is capable of producing a suitable fiber optic output. There's a huge amount of of variations on that. It's impossible to be general about that. But it's ultimately to make sure that you have a way of making your camera control the strobe. And that would also involve things like, are you going to shoot in TTL or manual? Now, you and I have fairly fixed ideas on that, but if you're someone who wants to shoot TTL, is your camera and strobe combination going to be capable of using TTL? Typically they can, but that's by no means universal. So these are the kinds of things you need to figure out beforehand.
No, absolutely. And yeah, if shooting TTL is a really important factor for you, then that becomes something very high on the shopping list. Now, nearly all strobes are going to be able to do TTL, so it's not normally a differentiator, but you want to make sure that that strobe does TTL with your camera, because sometimes there are some unusual compatibility issues. There are strobes that are fiber optic only, there are strobes that are cable only, and there are a lot of strobes that are both. But make sure that you've checked all those things out, and make sure that, if you are planning a camera upgrade in the future, that you've maybe thought, okay, I'm going to go to probably that type of camera. Is this strobe compatible with what I'm going to go to next as well? Because the point you made earlier on, which is very good, is that these are often longer term, purchases than other aspects.
Sorry, I'm just going to compound that as well, in that you've got some strobes that will offer TTL through cable but not through fiber, and vice versa. So it's a real minefield. Just because a strobe does TTL, you want to make sure it does TTL with your specific triggering technique that you plan to use. The point I was going to make next was that I would recommend always buying a pair of match strobes as opposed to a big one and a small one, which I see a lot, because obviously people feel, oh, I'll use this for my main light and this for filling in or that sort of thing. Underwater photography is a lot easier when your two strobes start the same. You may not have them on the same powers, but if they start the same, you know that as you adjust them from those positions, what's going on. So sorry, Adam, I cut into them, but I was just. No, it's a very good point. And having two identical strobes or two very similar strobes is my brain can't work with multiple things to solve at the same time, and it's one less thing to solve. No, my point I was going to make about longevity on strobes, and sorry, I'm returning to that, is that many modern manufacturers may well be a desirable feature now offer the option of updating strobes using firmware or updating firmware in strobes, and I think that is a useful option, and again, maybe one that solves some of the compatibility issues in the future. So it's a desirable feature. It's not a must-have yet, but I think it is desirable.
Adam, there's someone at my door. I need to go and get it. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
Okay, so strobes also increasingly now have a range of special modes and things like that can come along, including stroboscopic modes or high-speed sync modes. Some of these can be a real game changer for you, depending on the type of photography you want to do. For others, they might be features you never use. And, given that they're going to add a considerable amount to the cost of a strobe, think carefully about what if you are going to use them. I know it's sometimes quite hard before you've tried something to know if you are going to use it, but just because something has a fancy mode that's costing you money to access because it makes that product more expensive, just think carefully about whether you want to use it. I know lots of people find HSS really valuable, but with high-speed flash sync. But if you always dive in really dark conditions, for example, chances are you're probably not going to find many uses for it. If you're predominantly, say, a temperate or cold water diver, or you love doing black water diving, you're probably not going to find yourself using high-speed sync a lot. So think carefully about what you're investing in those respects. On that, I think that it's always good to look at the accessories that come with strobes, but make sure you understand them. There are some strobe manufacturers out there who provide accessories that seem to do almost nothing. And then there are other strobe manufacturers that provide accessories that really do modify the quality of the light from the strobe and allow you to create really different pictures. And the only way you're really going to be able to gauge how useful the accessories are is to, read what the manufacturers say about them, but also speak to photographers who are using them and find out if they really are worth the money or not. And thankfully, a lot of the manufacturers don't just bundle them in with the strobe. You get the option of selecting which you might want to use, but they can really transform a strobe, but they can also waste your money if you don't need them, or they actually don't really work as advertised.
Another sort of more long-term cost as well with strobes is how you power them as well. There are a number of options on this, but broadly speaking, you're talking about some kind of bespoke battery pack as opposed to using some kind of rechargeable standard AA battery typically.
Yeah.
The designer and the most efficient way of doing it will always be some kind of battery pack. You get more flashes for your buck out of a battery pack than you do anything else, but they have the downside of being obviously bespoke to the strobe that you're using, and also to being relatively expensive compared to obviously pen lights, which you can get anywhere. You can often use just straightforward pen lights if you have a problem.
What are pen lights, Adam?
Pen lights, AA's.
Double A's, sorry. I didn't know.
Now, I don't know if that's a South Africanism or an Americanism.
Yeah, I've not heard called pen lights before. Yeah, I mean, I would. Sorry, Adam, I interrupt you then.
But so really, you pay your money, makes choices, but certainly it's worth considering how you're gonna power your strobes and what the options are.
I would say, there's no doubt that AA's are the convenient way to do everything because you can buy them everywhere in the world. And also on a trip, you will find that everyone else who's using strobes will have something similar. So should you have an issue and flood a strobe, you'll be able to find some spare batteries to use and keep yourself going. There's no doubt that I find battery packs are very convenient to use. They pull out in one go, charge up very easily, and the strobes tend to run more reliably with them because the battery packs are modulated and controlled to keep the strobe running very reliably. Whereas with AA's, you've got multiple contacts, one of which can pick up some corrosion or something on and can't work. Both of those said, though, I think that the future surely must be more towards lithium batteries because of their more bang for space that they produce, and it's certainly the power that they give out seems very well suited to strobe photography in the future. And I think that as this video ages and people watch in the future, I think there'll be more and more strobes offered with lithium batteries, either built in that they just recharge, they can basically got the capacity to run all day, so you charge them overnight, which makes me nervous because one person's day isn't always the same as someone else's. And I've had days in underwater photography where I've done 4 dives and I've taken just 100 photos or something because not much was around. And then I've had crazy days where you shoot 1,500 images because everything was amazing and you're, dagger all day. And I don't know how you, with a built-in battery, manage both of those if you don't have access to recharging it during the day. However, it's hard to argue that lithium won't be the future for strobe batteries. So that, certainly as that, but there's only one strobe on the market currently that I'm aware of with lithium batteries, but that's surely going to change.
I think that's inevitable. It is a. I think there are safety concerns around. I think that's what's holding people back at the moment. But those will be addressed, I'm sure. And there'll be, there may well be a 3rd generation lithium battery that will address that and will be safe to use. So I think it's inevitable. It's going to happen.
The final point I wanted to make was just to come back to what I said at the start, is that, if you're one of those people who puts their hand up when they say that light is important for photography, then, don't skimp on your strobes. Next time you're on a dive boat, instead of sidling up to someone and saying, "Oh, what are you shooting?" Don't ask them about the camera or the housing. Ask them about their strobes. The more photographers are talking about light, the better.
And I think that, I was going to mention the idea, go onto social media, go onto Instagram, where you are Alex_mustard1.
I don't know. No, I think it's no. I think it's Alex Mustard 1 on Instagram.
Alex Mustard 1.
No underscore.
But have a look at photographers. Have a look at the way they've used light. Have a look at their strobe choices. And figure out what works best for you. I think it really is a decision you want to be making with as much information and as possible, really, rather than jumping in and buying whatever's cheapest when you've spent a lot of money on a housing and a camera. Thank you very much, Alex. And thanks again to Backscatter for sponsoring this episode. We really appreciate our sponsor support. Please feel free to add any comments or suggestions in the comments box and drop us a like if you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you again soon.